All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast this evening. I am Redbeard, your host, and I am flying solo tonight. As you can see, I don't have a guest, but what I do hopefully have for you is some important topics that I feel that are really worth taking the time to kind of go over. As such, I'm going to give it a minute here and wait for a few people to trickle in. And while that's happening, I am going to go over a little bit of housekeeping that I have. So, first and foremost, in the future here, for some episodes, I have hopefully a couple return guests that seem to do pretty well by you guys, and I think they're some pretty great people. We're going to be having Tom Edlin back, and also Sean from the American Liberty Caucus. At some point, I have to work with their schedules and get everything figured out, but it's going to be good when I can get them back. In addition to that, I'm hoping to have a few newer guests, hopefully here in the future, that are going to help me kind of put together a really nice episode to help show you how to write bills, legislation, how to introduce these things, and kind of how to get them worked into the system. So that is something that I'm really looking forward to being able to bring to you all, and hopefully you'll be able to get something out of that, so that way you'll be able to draft your own bills and legislation, and hopefully help empower you to be a part of this process that we're supposed to be a part of. It's important that we learn how to kind of ingratiate ourselves as this process occurs, and so we can be more involved, get more insight, and really be aware of what actually goes on in our legislative process, how the government functions. And so these things are not only a way to help you get involved, but hopefully to educate you further on the processes. So in the end of the day, when you see something you don't like, you know how to recognize it, you know how to kind of look for things that make sense, things that don't make sense, and kind of what you should or shouldn't do. So that's just some of my housekeeping. Tonight, it's probably not going to be as long as some of the other podcasts, just because it's me and nobody wants to listen to me ramble for too long. But we do have a few really good subjects. Now, the couple of subjects initially that I had thought of is as it pertains to spending, as it pertains to war, and then also I want to come back and I want to hit on, the free speech aspect of things, and really kind of evaluate how these things come together under liberty. Do they align with liberty? Do they make sense for liberty? Are they actually creating solutions, or are we just getting ourselves into the same old problems with the same old outcomes that are going to eventually just be highly destructive to liberty, but also, more importantly, highly destructive to our country in general? So some of you might have noticed I'm trying something a little bit different. I kind of adjusted a few things. It's very, very minor, so just bear with me. And I will try to do the very best that I can. Looks like we have Centerline Systems on here. Brother, I appreciate you coming in. Gene from across the pond, absolutely appreciate you coming in. And I can't wait to see everybody else who decides to take some time out of their day and join us. It's always welcome. It's always appreciated. So without further ado, I would kind of like to hit on some of the spending things here. And the reason I want to kind of start with spending is because it will eventually kind of roll into the warfare aspect of things, and the whole mess and amalgamation, unfortunately and regrettably, that we have to deal with. But one of the things as it pertains to spending that we have that creates an issue is the fact that, on one hand, with the current administration that we have, that a lot of these people are like, no, yeah, we got to cut spending. We have to come in and we have to reduce, and not only what the overall budget is, but we have to try and reduce the footprint of government, downsize government. That was the entire point. And when there was an opportunity to, and some of you may have seen this, I would say not probably just in the United States, but some of you may have seen this abroad and across the pond. but there was a continuing resolution that occurred. And this continuing resolution, the reason that it was pretty, I don't know if you want to say controversial, but it was questionable, like it was in maybe questionable is too late, but it had a lot of bad juju around it because of the fact that passing the continuing resolution that they did end up passing only really promised to grow government and to continue bloating and expanding that budget. And there was one individual, Thomas Massey, who said, absolutely not. This is not what people want. But at the same time, this is very contrary to what DOGE is trying to do, which is to make cuts. Now, the questions that I feel kind of surround this, and I may not be alone in this, but if you're trying to cut things, typically that doesn't involve, continuing the bloating and the spending that you had before. If you're going to cut something, you don't typically add to it in the end. It's kind of, I like to use the analogy for daylight savings time where, it's like people say, oh, there's going to be this change in how time is, but it's really just cutting one end of the carpet off and attaching it to the other end. Well, what we got here with the continuing resolution is not only just that, whereas nothing changed, but in the end of the day, it's like they added a segment to the carpet. So now the carpet's longer, but we hear this perpetual conversation of in these excuses to where it's like, oh, well, we can't do it this time, but we'll do it next time. We'll absolutely do it next time. And it becomes a problem because you can't shrink government by continuing to grow a bloated budget. And this presents a lot of different issues because now we have to start looking at where it actually impacts the American people. It's going to demand more of us. It's going to take more out of our wallets, more out of our businesses, more out of our communities to fuel a bunch of these programs that, a lot of people said that they wanted cut and they wanted to take some of the bulk and the weight out of these programs. But now it's like they're just feeding it right back into the monster state. And so you have such a glaring contradiction when it comes to spending the budget and actually trying to downsize this monster state, as Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment says, or calls it. It just doesn't work good. One of the biggest areas that I see that we have a huge problem that people don't want to touch at all, and I know that this is a fairly controversial portion, but it's the military. We continue adding exorbitant amounts of money into the military, and this is fueled by several different factors, of which we'll be getting into here shortly. But, it really does beg the question, albeit it's not just the military, what programs do we have that we absolutely need? Because it seems anytime that we continue to bloat this budget, we continue to push forward these continuing resolutions, it just seems like there's just more and more waste going to these agencies or these organizations or these sectors of government that really have nothing to do. They either don't do anything or they do something so egregious that they only hurt us down the road. So it does become a problem. Now, it is one of those things when we talk about spending to where when we do look at some of these agencies and we do look at where the money goes, it sometimes doesn't seem like there's a lot of transparency. And whenever somebody kind of brings up an audit, it seems like an audit is one of those things. It's kind of treated like when people bring up the 10th Amendment, we really don't want to talk about that. We really, it's fine. We don't have to talk about it. But in the end of the day, like we're not talking on the metric of millions. We're not talking on the metric of billions. We're talking about trillions of dollars a year that are fed into this behemoth. And where does it all go? It's one of those things to where it seems like that's a question that so many people in government they don't want to talk about, they don't want to answer, and it seems like there's no accountability. So we have a serious spending problem, and that spending problem does not just exist as it pertains to our domestic issues and to all of the things that affect us here at home, but it affects all of the subsidies that we provide to to other governments around the world. Why are we subsidizing other governments? Why are we funding other governments? Why are we funding other wars? Why are we funding other people's militaries? Why are we doing all of these things and outsourcing all of this money and supplies and all of these utilities to these governments, when in the end of the day, all it does is take and rape from the American people our hard-earned tax dollars, and there's seemingly no reinvestment into the betterment of our country. This is a very, very problematic thing, and we see this not only just in general funding, but we see this in every conflict that arises. And this is kind of a point that brings me to the problematic relationship that we have with alliances. Now, our founding fathers, a number of them, used to speak on alliances fairly often. And one of the most prolific ones was George Washington in his farewell address. He talked about entangling alliances, how it gets us caught up in this wave of bias, and how we take a bias and a liking to people that we consider allies. And then, slowly as time goes on, we end up doing a little bit more for them and a little bit more for them until it becomes this relationship in which we are getting involved as a country in things that are, one, not only our problems, but two, things that may injure us down the road. We have the ability to create our own enemies and to create our boogeymen, so to speak. And this becomes very, very precarious, especially as it pertains to funding. And, as somebody said down in the comments, NATO, centerline systems, 100%. You're not wrong about that. NATO is one of those things to where if you look at it and, we look at, trying to cut back and we want to decrease funding and we want to decrease waste, but yet we continue to siphon money into places like NATO, into places that really don't have our best interests at heart. And when I talk about funding, and especially when I talk about it from a warfare aspect and being involved in foreign conflicts, being involved in things that have nothing to do with us and actually put us in a very, very precarious situation, what I'm really trying to get at is the fact that you have a lot of people that talk about being America first, but when you look at the books, when you look at where the money goes, when you look at the actions that we take, and we'll talk more about this as the episode goes forward, it's not America first. If it was America first, we'd be keeping the money here. We would be funding things that actually make sense, not just wanton waste for researching how many lizards we can keep alive in a containment facility in Arizona, right? It's not frivolous things. It's not whimsical things. And it certainly is not our responsibility to be subsidizing foreign governments. It's not our responsibility to be building their militaries, to be fitting their militaries, to be doing any of this. It is absolutely abhorrent, and it is an overstep and an overreach of what we're supposed to be doing. It's no wonder that there's so much waste, and spending is definitely out of control. This, as I had brought up earlier, this continuing resolution is no exception whatsoever. And one thing I want to say is, when there was the schism that occurred and Thomas Massey was like, absolutely not, I will not stand for this. This is wrong. It is not what the American people want. And it is absolutely contrary to what it is that I love how he put the onus on the people that complain the most about spending. He put the onus on them and being like, hey, like, you're not doing what you say you're doing, and all you're doing is the same thing you've continued to do, which is propagate more spending. And what we found from this is there was outrage projected towards Thomas Massey. There's outrage. I mean, Trump even came out against Thomas Massey saying he needed to be primaried, which is absolutely ridiculous. And then you have this turnaround, and I think this is really interesting. You have this turnaround where we need to primary Thomas Massey is what the line was. But then in the end of the day, you have the the president, you have him supporting a person like Lindsey Graham, which is very problematic. Why would you support a person that is completely in the opposite position as you, especially as it pertains to an issue like Ukraine? Why would you be supporting an individual like this? This man is no good. He's contradictory to what it is you say your values are, what your principles are, what your agenda is. And it doesn't really make any sense. Whereas Thomas Massey is more in line with what you're trying to do than a person like Lindsey Graham is. And so now, coming away from the budget, I want to talk about, the aspect of wars. War is one of the greatest, it has one of the greatest potentials to usurp the liberties and the rights of the people. And that the instruments of war have always typically eventually come home to roost, to where they become used against the populace, the native populace of that country, notwithstanding specifically the US. But we find this, and every single time that war goes on, especially if it's unconstitutional war, which, I mean, you can go through the history books, and I don't care what anybody says. If Congress isn't the ones who declare war, then it is an unconstitutional war. There are very, 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 very few and far between exceptions to where that may or may not be the case, but there's a lot that needs to go into that. Congress is the official mechanism for being able to declare war. Now, when we start getting embroiled in wars and we start getting embroiled in these conflicts, whether it's directly or indirectly, what we end up finding is it creates problems. And we have this horrible knack of, again, subsidizing, but also, further funding, arming, building up all of these different these nations or these people or these groups. And then all of a sudden, it's like nobody actually considers the order of effects. Nobody actually considers what the blowback from this is. Nobody, and if they do, it seems like news to me, or perhaps it's part of a perfect plan to, augment whatever agenda it is that they are, but it's not an agenda of liberty. So it's one of those things to where when we look at war, it should never be something you run to. It should never be something that we go flailing into. We have to get involved. We have to do this. And we most certainly should not be fighting wars on behalf of somebody else. Again, entangling alliances cause us nothing but problems. And it also is, a egregious mechanism to the usurpation of individual liberties and rights here at home. It creates a situation in which, with an alliance, with these, deals, and with these, the sharing of military equipment and or fighting on behalf of these people, we start making enemies that we wouldn't otherwise have. And this feeds this cycle, this endless cycle of, well, we need to go fight here now. We need to go fight this war. We need to go do this. And then you start getting the other aspect of it where, we're we're just going to test the waters. We're not going to do a full-blown thing, but we're just going to send a few people in, and whether that's a special operations group, whether it's a clandestine team, you start getting into the agencies and stuff like that. And it all becomes this big embroiled monster that really doesn't do anything but cause a bunch of problems. It drains, or I should say, it drains the pockets of Americans, but it also drains the aspect of liberty. When I look at the things that go on and the people that our government overwhelmingly supports today, there's a lot of questions that are to be had. Why we continue aiding, why we continue to fund, why we continue to be involved in conflicts and wars and things that are none of our problem, it doesn't have a good outcome. And, unfortunately, what we're seeing today is our interests our interests are not only contrary constitutionally and liberty wise, but other countries' interests are starting to become our interests, and this is not good. We're starting to see where this tilt is going towards. We're starting to dip our toe more and more back into places like Yemen. We're starting to get the rhetoric towards Iran. We're starting to get back into this mode of like, well, we need to, but what about this? And if we don't do this first, then, it's all going to be chaos. And if we don't do this, if we don't do that, and then, you have the whole situation with Ukraine to where if we don't fund Ukraine, it's like, or, we don't get involved, we stop making enemies, we, take courses of action that actually make sense, that aren't going to be draining both our blood, our treasure, and the liberties of the American people. And we stay out of other people's problems, and we don't make other countries' problems our problems. It becomes, I know I've said that a lot of this is problematic, but it very much is. When you look at the Constitution, when you look at how the fundamental structure of our government is, and then you look at how we conduct ourselves, especially to certain nations, and how we go forth and we do things for certain nations, it's like people become surprised. Oh my goodness, this is a horrible outcome. Oh my goodness, these people hate us. Oh my goodness, how we never could have envisioned this. And I don't really understand where the surprise is. I mean, we've had a number of people through the many, many years, the many decades, the centuries that our country has been around, that have distinctly warned us to not become embroiled into the affairs of other countries. It's damaging to us. Overwhelmingly damaging, and it becomes an abusive and exploitative relationship to where even if we are the ones that maintain the most power in that relationship, we're still giving away our blood and our treasure for somebody else's fights, for somebody else's battles. We are making enemies that were never our enemies to begin with, or otherwise may have been avoided, our own. And this is antithetical to liberty. It is antithetical to liberty. It is not conducive to liberty whatsoever. I'm going to take a minute here and kind of scroll through some of the comments. UK, let's see here. So Gene is saying that the UK is the same. We keep funding other people's countries, yet we need to fund ourselves first. Absolutely, Gene. Absolutely. We see what the effects are as it pertains to funding other countries. It's very hard to be pro your country or pro liberty when the blood and the treasure of your country ends up being siphoned to somebody else. And as I was speaking about here, you see what these different effects tend to be. You see what the consequences tend to be. But your country, much like my country, we have a group of people here that are not concerned about our brothers and our sisters and our sons and our daughters and our fathers and our mothers. They don't care about these things. What they care about is making the best deal possible, being able to go forth and to utilize whatever leverage or power that they have to not only line their pockets, but to put themselves in an advantageous position to ascertain more power. I mean, what we're seeing ultimately is this sense of empire building. And, it's again, Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center describes the United States in particular as the monster state. We are a massive empire, and we are not, it's to a point to where it's like we can't even sustain this thing anymore. And we continue to churn and grind the wheels of perpetual war. That's all we're becoming to know. And that is, when we consider what the effects of liberty are, liberty takes a back seat if it takes any seat at all. Because eventually what you start to see with perpetual war, with perpetual conflict, with alliances, and I'm going to talk more on this soon in a bit, is liberty is the last considered, if it's considered at all. And so between your country and my country, as well as many other countries in Europe and all over, we have to start getting educated about what the identifiers are. We have to look at these things and we have to get active. We have to start getting involved, and we have to start fermenting, or at least continuing the process of, one, not engaging in wars, but two, keeping the money that we have here in the United States, not funding other countries, not funding other organizations, not funding other entities, but bringing it back here. And I think if you can do that, and I'm not saying it's easy, but if you're able to do that, then you'll start to be able to slowly but surely ascertain control. But it's a very difficult thing to do. And it's not without its risks, it's not without its gambles. So, Ground Fog, hello. Looks like we have Snowshoe Dave in the house. I appreciate you coming in tonight, sir. Then we got another comment here. If we don't get mineral rights, someone else bad may get it. There's that wonderful whataboutism. It becomes this thing of like, well, if we don't get there first, then, the world falls apart. And it's really, it's just one of those things to where it's like, well, if we don't do this, then we may never get it. And to me, it just amounts to nothing more of like, it's never enough. It's never enough. It's never enough. And once you allow this process to take place, it becomes addictive. It becomes very, very addictive. And there's this never ending, cyclone of, we have to do this. We have to do this. And you start finding ways, to find ways that are just weaker and weaker excuses or justifications to go into another country, to try to make a deal with one country and then turn around and stab them in the back, or whatever the case is. And sadly, what we're starting to find, and what we've seen over the last decade or more, is a situation to where they've gotten really intelligent and they utilize organizations like Blackwater, BlackRock, and other, NGO types, to where they go forth and they lay the groundwork. And then you have these countries that eventually come in and they start to do all the things that it is that they do to either foment regime change, which is, show me where that is in the Constitution. Where is the United States in particular specifically delegated the authority to go change the regime of another country? I don't see it anywhere. I've read the Constitution several times. I have not seen it anywhere where it specifically says we have the ability to do that. And I would be willing to bet that we are not dissimilar from other countries as it pertains to that. Well, they might not have a particular provision as to what they can and cannot do. I mean, regime change is just something that is just insidious in and of itself. And again, when we talk about an order of effects and, blowback, well, I mean, we've seen how that's played out in the last 20 or 30 years. And I would argue that it hasn't worked out very well. So let's see here. The signal chat issue actually highlights the points I just made. Why are we, the U.S., leading a bombing against the Houthis? The vast majority of the shipping impacts Europe, not us. And, in the end of the day, I really appreciate what you said, because if you look back, Trump was actually quoted as saying, like, hey, what we need to do is we need to pick up the phone and talk to these people and see if we can, have a conversation about how to move forward. Now we're just right back to bombing again, and it should disturb people, the fact of how easy it is to just go forth, bomb a country, and the thing of it is it really is becoming easy. It doesn't even matter whether you have women, children, innocents. It doesn't really matter. If we can get one guy even, then that's all that matters. There's no regard for human life. It doesn't, and I would even further go into this. And I would say, when we look at how the situation surrounding the Houthis, we have entanglements with certain partners in the Middle East that have brought us into a precarious position. And when we look at these positions and we look at our dealings, we should also be figuring out, is this advantageous to the United States? Now, I'm not going to make an assurance or a guarantee, but I would argue that if we weren't attached to various countries that have gripes with the Houthis, then there is a higher likelihood, not a guarantee, a higher likelihood that they would be like, oh, okay, well, they're not the ones causing the problem in our backyard, so we're not going to bother them. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's what picking up a phone can do for you. Now, some people might say, well, that's not the way the world works. But I would argue that if you looked at history and if you looked at the way that men have conducted themselves during times of chaos and times of strife and times of war, sometimes it's the side that picks up the phone that creates an opportunity to lessen, mitigate, or altogether get rid of the potential threat that's down the road. Does it work all the time? No. Should we be prepared for something like that? Yes, but it should be a decisive response if it does happen, and leave it at that. It's the signal chat. The signal chat is insane to me, because we also have this administration that really came into fruition on the guise of like, no, we're done with war. We're not doing this. We are not getting involved. We are not going to be following our predecessors' footsteps. This is not the policy of the United States. And then when if you've looked at the chats as it pertains to the particular strike that they talked about, it was just this outward applause, like, great job, go team, you did a bang up job. And it's like, this is so contradicting to everything it is that they preached about. So at this point, I mean, you're having a damaged credibility. Now, some people did say, well, Vance kind of protested it. Okay. But in the end of the day, like, kind of protesting something, it's not enough. I mean, you might as well have gone in there with, soft, white knit gloves and tried to be super proper when you said it, or you explained your protest. And I mean, look, you're either going to go forward with a set of principles or you're not, and you just have to be honest with yourselves. And I don't think, unfortunately, from what we're seeing, and we still have time ahead of us, but as it stands right now, the disposition of this particular administration is, it's not anti-war. It's not getting us out of war. I mean, aside from the Houthis, we already have conversations about not only, we have conversations about striking Iran. Why? Why are we having these conversations? Yeah, no, and I'm happy that you spelled that out. I mean, I think the thing with Vance is he knows, like, he is very well aware of right versus wrong, and I think of all the people there, he's the one that actually may have moral qualms with it. Now, I do have to take some points away from him. At the end of the day, he went with it, and he was just like, well, whatever the team wants, whatever we decide to do. And I'm not going to degrade the guy, but he brings up a very good point. I mean, how does it help us? And moreover, again, like you had stated, how is it helping Europe? It's one of those things to where at some point, Europe has got to figure this out for themselves. And I would put forth the same message to Europe as I would to the United States, to where foreign entanglements, alliances, and all of these different things are only going to get you embroiled in more chaos, more strife, more usurpation of your liberties and your rights. And before you know it, it's all going to be washed away or watered down so much that it just doesn't really seem to matter. It's very precarious. And, and I have spoken at length several times, not this is the first time here really, but on some other podcasts, and about the dangers of getting involved with entangling alliances, especially as it pertains to war. And there's no good outcome. There's no good outcome at all. So I like what Gene says here pertaining to the conversation that I was having, about funding and war and all of these different things. There really is a gateway drug aspect. Once you've had that first taste, it's hard to go back. It all becomes that dabble of the toe in the pool, and it's just like, oh well, it's not so bad. You start to temper to it, and then it becomes a thing to where it's just, how do we exist without it? And unfortunately, it's a situation to where you start to get so used to war and in a war type of economy that you start to forget how to operate a regular economy, which has its own issues. So now, with all this being said, and I want to continue the theme of entanglements and, the way that we conduct foreign relations. The Constitution talks about this. And, and again, George Washington, in his farewell address, had spoken about this quite a bit at the very end. And what I think is dangerous is we talked about war. We covered war. We covered getting involved in conflicts, starting our own conflicts, and, subsidizing and funding and supporting other countries. That in and of itself has a lot of precarious ramifications, from the degradation of liberty to funding and so on and so forth. But what I think is something that a lot of people either don't like to talk about, but I think it's well known, or it's sensitive, or whatever the case is when you start having foreign diplomats, foreign leaders from other countries that come in, they stand in front of Congress, and I'll throw out two individuals. You have Netanyahu, and then you also have Zelensky, that seem to come here a fair bit, while Zelensky maybe not as much anymore. But they come in here, they stand in front of our Congress, they talk about all of the outpour and how, that there needs to be a curtailing of certain speech, and there has to be, people shouldn't be allowed to say this, and they shouldn't be allowed to profess this, and you can't side with this country, and if you criticize our country, then this becomes problematic. And that right there should be a clear indicator that relationship is not one worth sustaining. As soon as, and that's not an emotional statement, that is not an emotional argument. That is an argument through the perception of liberty, because it is an attack on liberty as it pertains to the United States. We have a constitution. We have rights that are codified, that are natural rights that we have, that are recognized. And you're having individuals that come into our Congress, that plead to our bureaucrats, that plead to our officials. Don't let them say this. Don't let them criticize us. Don't let them say anything mean or bad about our countries. And as a result, unfortunately, we have individuals in our government that cave, that curtail, that will sell you out and criminalize your criticism of another country, your criticism of being able to speak freely in the United States of America, because it offends somebody else. This is a very, very dangerous path. And I know that my friends over in Europe have experienced this to a very extreme degree, to where all it takes is to see somebody silently praying on a corner. You don't even know if they're praying, just standing there on the corner in front of a building, whether it be an abortion building or whatever the case is. And what happens to them? It's when you live in a country that has codified in the Constitution the First Amendment, and in that First Amendment of the 5 of the 5 rights codified in that First Amendment, speech being one of them, and you have a dignitary, a leader, or a representative or a bureaucrat from another country that says, no, we don't like this. We're asking, or in some cases, demanding that you curtail this because it's misinformation, because it's hurtful, because it doesn't agree with us, because it hurts our feelings, because it is oppositional to who we are. I say I find this egregious. I find it abhorrent, and I think it's ridiculous that we entertain people like that. I really do. The first responsibility of a just government, and I say just government, as it is instituted amongst the people, and the only form of just government, is to preserve the liberty and the rights of those people. Pure and simple. When you look at our Constitution and you look at the wording in the Constitution, this is abundantly clear. And when we have individuals in our country that start drafting laws to tell people what you can and cannot say at the behest of a foreign leader or at the behest of a foreign politician, this is not only the complete destruction of one of the most essential rights, but it shows you how little these people care about you. And it is a disgrace to allow people to come in here, ask or demand that certain things be done to deprive us of the First Amendment. This is insane. This is absolute insanity. In their countries, they can do what they want. This is my country. And this is my government. I am disgusted with my government. But I also find it disgusting that people feel the need to come over here and tell me what rights I have. Because I already hear it enough from my own government. This creates a problem. And this problem is built over the numerous entanglements we've had over the years. The numerous entanglements that become destructive of who we are as Americans. It creates divides. And at the most, it destroys our liberty and our rights. Because the interests of America soon become the interests, or I should say, the interests of America take the back seat, and our interests then become the interests of whatever government it is that we ally ourselves with. This is antithetical to liberty. It is antithetical to our Constitution. Chris Anhold did a fantastic piece on both X and Instagram outlining the clear particulars of how people are supposed to, in government, how people are supposed to conduct themselves as it pertains to dealing with foreign nations. If I can, I will try to put a link in the description, but I highly suggest that people read it. We are in a very precarious position right now to where there are certain things that can go well. There are certain things that could go well. But at the end of the day, if we are taking actions to try and move our country forward that only usurp liberty, whether that is via funding, whether that is via war, whether that is via allowing other people to come into our country and tell us how we are supposed to conduct ourselves. The usurpation of liberty is unacceptable. And you don't move forward as a people. You crumble as a people. Your nation falls. It does not stand. It becomes a shell of its former self because you forsake the people that you, as a government official, as a representative, no less, are supposed to protect, to defend, to stand up for. But this is not without our involvement. And I want that to be abundantly clear too. These people get away with these things because we have allowed them to get away with these things. We have a fire and forget procedure as it pertains to elections, which is we go in, we cast a ballot, and we just look away and we just hope for the best for the next 4 years. And this is not the way that we need to be doing things, not in the United States, and I would even argue not over in Europe. It's not palatable to liberty. It's not palatable to freedoms or rights or whatever it is that you want to call them. And it only serves to usurp the very people that those countries have. I'm going to take a minute here, and I'm going to take a look at one of the comments that just came in. Hurdy words, or the fact that you may not think bad things. Even speaking ill of a school got 2 parents arrested and then charges dropped 2 years later. How to make that make sense? Make that make sense. And then we're at the point to where foreign dignitaries and leaders can come in here and try to direct our policy. And again, I hate to harp on it, but it's so important to harp on it, because why are we having our elected officials cave to this type of stuff? We should not be entertaining people in our Congress that are going to come in here and sit here and tell us how we're expected to conduct ourselves as it pertains to our rights and our liberties. Completely antithetical to who we are. Completely antithetical. Now, all this to say, because I don't want to harp on this too much, but that does not mean that we cannot have a relationship. We can trade with countries. We can talk to countries. We can do these things, but we must do them as an independent country, not one with an alliance. And we can do these things. We can have diplomacy with countries where it does not require us to be entangled or embroiled in that country's affairs, them in our affairs, or us in their wars or their issues or their turbulence or their turmoil. We do not need to be involved in these things, especially as it pertains to things like regime change. Now, one area that I do want to put out here that I would ask people to look into is back, I believe it was 2009. It was 99. It was around 99 or 2000, I believe it was. There was something called 7 countries in 5 years. Okay. What it was is an outline of countries that were ripe, if you will, for regime change, and being able to get these countries into a disposition that was not only favorable to us, but to countries like Israel and some of the other countries around there. 6 of those countries have fallen. The last of those countries is Iran. This is problematic, and this is something that started way back then, over 20 years ago. Why are we involved in anything to do with something like that? That is not our business. That is not in our interest. It's certainly not in the interest of Americans, and it's certainly not in the interest of people in Europe or anywhere else around the country or around the globe. This is not a good, fruitful relationship. This is a volatile, egregious, degenerate agenda that not only affects us at home, but the lives of the people in those countries. Now, I have no doubt that some of those countries had less than optimal governments. I don't dispute that at all. But it is also not our job to be the police of the world. It is not our job to perform regime change. Again, all of these different things, whether it is wasteful spending, overreaching government, perpetual warfare, whether it is allowing people to come into our country and be able to drive home a point that hopefully is going to dictate policy, laws, legislation, it's all subversive and it's all destructive to liberty. And it's all being packaged up and sold to you in this notion that, but it's a good thing to do. It's going to help advance democracy. There's going to be stability in the world. There's going to be all of this and all of these wonderful things in this whole painting, this whole picture. They want it to look perfect. But what they're not telling you is the cost. What they're not telling you is what you have to give up for this to happen. They're not telling you all of the horror stories that come along with it. They don't tell you about the second and third order effects. They don't tell you about the blowback. They don't tell you why this country is friendly to us, or these people were friendly to us one day and now they hate us the next day. And they avoid all of that. And then they don't want to explain it because, well, it's all part of the plan. And I have to say, one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard in my entire life, and it's a ridiculous notion, is this idea of like, well, they hate your freedom. I don't know. A lot of the places that seem to dislike the United States, as well as many other countries, tend to hate us because we were bombing the crap out of them for a very, very long time. I think it has less to do with freedom, and it has everything to do with the fact that our government bureaucrats decided that that place was ripe for regime change, and they wanted to use your sons and daughters to go ferment that regime change, and now they're resentful. Whoever would have thought? It's insanely crazy to me that there's this notion that they hate our freedoms. I don't know, a 2,000-pound bomb entered the chat, and that might have something to say why they hate us. You're killing generations of people that you've never met in your entire life, and it's just a Tuesday to most of these people. It's ridiculous. To me, it's sadistic. There's a level of sadism and absolute degeneracy that's involved in this type of behavior. And again, I'll harp on it. It's antithetical to liberty. It does not serve us to be doing these things. So I think it's fundamental that you have movements like the anti-war movement. You have movements that are out there that in the greater liberty sphere that are totally opposed to this, that are totally opposed to wasteful spending, that are totally opposed to, overreaching government. And we need more people in these organizations. We need more accountability. It takes you and me to stop this ridiculousness and to bring our liberty back to our communities, to defend our rights not exercised, our rights not kept. Exercise your voice. Utilize the First Amendment so that we don't have to start defending the rest of them. Get involved. This is the best course of action. It's not the only course of action, but it is the best course of action. So there was something that was said in the comments, because they hate you. And they really do. You have some of the worst people that exist in government. Why? Because power attracts the worst and corrupts the best. 100%. We are in a crisis. We are a nation that is in distress. I think that distress never went away after the inauguration. But I think we're starting to see a situation that's becoming more and more abundantly clear as time goes on. And I really do hope that at some point we do curtail and we do get away from foreign entanglements. We do get away from these alliances. We do stop subsidizing countries. We do get away from the ridiculous rhetoric of, well, we'll just slap some tariffs on them and it's just that easy. Well, there's more to it than that. There's a lot more to it. And one thing that I heard on the Part of the Problem podcast with Dave Smith, he brought up a fantastic point when Trump was talking about how great tariffs were from late in the 1700s all the way up to contemporary times up to 1913. Dave was right when he had pointed out that when you look at the conditions that existed, we didn't have an income tax. We didn't have overwhelming regulations. We didn't have overreaching government. We had a properly backed currency. We had stability. We had the ability to go forth and create our businesses and create our lives. And it was a totally different environment. We are not in that environment anymore. So this perception that it's going to be the same order of effects is vastly wrong. It's vastly different. It's the type of rhetoric that really is just, it's devoid of actually looking into what the conditions were. And when you take only one part of something and you say these things are great because of whatever, and you don't see the fact that the conditions on the ground at the time, and we had the highest amount of prosperity in this country, we're at the peak when we didn't have income tax, when we didn't have hyper regulation, when we don't have bloated budgets and overwhelming government restrictions, and we didn't have all the unconstitutional garbage that we have today. And we had a currency that was worth something. And we didn't have the Federal Reserve and so many other things. That is why we were at the peak. It wasn't because of tariffs. It's because we were inherently more liberty-oriented as a people. We had more leeway in how to live our lives. We could make our own decisions. Now, if you want to hear a great overview, in my opinion, and you know, this might be shameless self-promotion to some degree, but go back and look at some of the things that a previous guest, Tom Edlam, a fantastic economist, had to say about tariffs. And he answered some pretty good questions as it pertains to the economy in general. And then when you listen to that, then come back and think about the conditions that we exist in today. They are not the same. We are not conditionally ripe for a flourishing economy, for a flourishing turnaround. There's so many things that we have to fix before that even becomes a reality. And everybody just looks at the economy and all of these whimsical fixes as if it's like a thing of overnight oats, to where you just set it, you know, you mix them up and you throw them in the fridge and you can go right up to them the next day and eat them. It doesn't work that way. You can't even get close to that if you're even having a debate about whether or not we should have the income tax. It should be a no. We can't even get close to that type of prosperity if we have the Federal Reserve. We can't even get close to that if we don't have a stable currency. We don't even get close to that if we have over and hyper regulation of companies that overwhelmingly, not only do they affect the larger companies and affect the billionaires and the millionaires and all the very successful people, but they hammer down on the independent business owners that have the small businesses, that have the smaller footprint, but are so essential to our neighborhoods, to our communities. These are the people we should be supporting. But it's hard for them to be able to exist in a situation to where they're hyper regulated all the time. You can do this, but you can't do that. And then the next year, oh, doing this is now what's going to get you into trouble, or you get arrested for this, or you can't do this. Oh, you messed up on your tax statements, so now we're going to have to fine you X amount, thousands of dollars, or we're going to put you in prison because you didn't say something the way that we wanted you to do it. Look, this is not a simple critique of simply just Trump. This is a critique, and this is a critical, liberty-oriented evaluation of the entire administration and administrations before it. And being able to critically look at not just where we are now, but where we want to be. Because if we want to be in a better spot, we better damn well start acting like it. We can't continue down this course expecting things to get better. It's absolute insanity. This is why it's so fundamentally important for each and every single one of you to get involved into your town halls, your committees, your town councils, get involved in your cities, get involved in your children's education, get involved in so many of these little facets that we have, because we have to start working together in order to get the change that we desire. And that requires sacrifice. It's not easy. It requires sacrifice. With that being said, there are a number of organizations that you can be a part of. I'm a part of one. I'm a part of the American Liberty Caucus, and I'm very proud to be a part of that. I think that they do great work. And it's not simply because I'm a part of it that I say that, but it's because I've got to meet those people. I've got to see the conversations that are had. I get to learn something from these people, and I become a better person as a result. And it augments me to be able to come here to talk to you about issues that matter, but it allows me to be able to go and talk to people in my community about these issues, to make the change, to make meaningful connections, to partner with other organizations and groups for the sake of liberty. All of these things we can start to deal with if we can come together and put liberty at the forefront. But until we do that, we're going to be a nation in distress for a very, very long time. When I look back at kind of how I wanted to frame this discussion tonight, there were a lot of different things that I had said in my head. There's a lot of different things that I would have liked to have said, and maybe I did say them tonight. It's amazing because you can go through so much prep time and thinking about what it is you might want to talk about. But I think when we look back at the conversation, when you look at the spending, when you look at the wars, when you look at what is occurring when we have people that come into our country and tell us to write laws, to handcuff our ability as a people to speak freely. And in some places, it didn't stop there for some people. When I look at these conversations, this is a necessary conversation. This is a conversation that should be held. This is a conversation that is required. And it's a conversation that should be had perpetually. Because these are pressing conversations. They're very, very important conversations. If we're not willing to recognize the threats that we face, then we might as well just go blindly into the depths and just accept the fate. We might as well rest the chains of our own subjugation upon us and forget it. But I don't believe in that. I'm hopeful, and I have hope for the future. Hope is the one thing they're not going to take from me, and I don't want them to take it from you. And liberty is another thing that I don't want them to take, and I will fight to make sure that they don't take that. But you also have to do that too. I'm going to go through a couple comments here again. Let's see here. Gene, you must have a for and against, otherwise it's just tyranny and power-hungry elites. Yeah. I always tell people, I think when you look at this, if you're going to advocate for liberty, in my opinion, if you're going to advocate for liberty or something that you're passionate about or whatever the case is, there's always going to be another side to it. It is prudent to understand the other side of something. And it is prudent to expose yourself to some degree to what that other side is, so that way you can understand what it is that you're trying to do. And then also understand what it is that your goals, your ambitions, your aspirations are in the furtherance of these things. You have to have a well-rounded view, so that way you can augment and use the mechanisms of promoting, defending, and guarding liberty to the fullest extent. And that's with anything that we do. One of the best things I had heard, and I don't remember where I heard it, but so many people often listen to respond, but we don't listen to understand. And I think that that's a serious problem that we face not only in the United States, but in many other places. It's so many of these problems that I talked about this evening are not just unique to the United States. They plague many other places, and it is my hope that all of these places, much like my home here in the United States, I hope that we can start to embrace liberty as time goes on. I hope that that is the case. And I am hopeful to see that there are people that are starting to come around to this. So in the end of the day, though, you have to have a well-rounded picture, but you also have to be willing to listen to understand. Listen to understand the picture. Because if you don't, then you just again, walking aimlessly. You know, I have a tendency at times to kind of go over a few thoughts in my head, and I try to, say, well, I don't know if this is necessarily the best way to state this or whatever the case is, but I realize that, sometimes you just have to, most of the time you just have to go and state the case, whether it's uncomfortable or not. And I know that there are people that, they like, or they have a bias from one country to the next, whether they reside in the United States or over in the UK or other parts of Europe. And I think that's okay. But at the same time, in the end of the day, like, I think what's important is that we should always have a bias to liberty. It's my personal opinion. And if I have a bias, that's what my bias is towards. And every person has a bias to some degree, whether that's a bias to the left, a bias to the right, a bias to liberty, et cetera, et cetera. We all have a bias. I don't really believe, I used to, but I don't really believe anymore that there is such thing as unbiased. I think we all come into it with our point of view or something, but we try to understand. I think that's the important thing. We try to understand. So when we look at these issues, we look at what these issues are and how we can overcome these challenges. That's the crux of everything we should strive for. And we have to do it. So I'm not going to drag this out much longer. But, before we wrap this up, let me know in the comments kind of what your opinions are. Where do you think we're heading? What do you think the outcome is going to be? Do you think that some of these things are okay? Do you think that they're not okay? Do you agree with what it is that I've had to say tonight? I want to know what the feedback is and where people come from. And also I think that, being able to have these discussions and to share these discussions, not only just with me, but other people in the comments, is vitally important. So keep the conversations going. That's the huge portion of why I do this and why I bring up these topics and these conversations. They're vitally important. I hope at some point that we do get a fix in the budgets. I hope that we do start to have more people, more elected officials that start making better decisions. And honestly, I have to say, thus far, for the few things that may be somewhat over the target, boy, it is rough. It is very rough. We need to go into this with some trepidation, and we really have to hold some feet to the fire, because I'm here to tell you, with the budget, with the wars, if we're not careful with this, we are going to, really go down if you think it's bad now, we're going to go down a road that is going to hurt a lot. And some of the people here tonight might have heard me say this. And if you're new or you're returning and you haven't heard me say this, I have this cheesy thing to where it's like, hey, it's my obligatory congratulations. We've made it another day without succumbing to nuclear hellfire. And I do mean that, it's, man, it does worry me a bit, but I think we can come out of this. And I think that's the big thing is, we got to have some hope. And as long as we can continue to advocate to stay out of wars, to advocate for a good budget, to advocate for liberty and rights, I think we'll be heading down the right path. So with that being said, let me know what you guys think down below. Let me know if you like this. If you want to hear, more on certain subjects also in the future, let me know kind of what it is that you'd be interested in hearing about. And, I will try to do my very best to get that fit in and to have conversations around meaningful subjects. It's not always easy to cover some subjects. Some subjects I have to do a little homework on, but I try my best. I do try to provide the best informative podcast that I possibly can. Tonight was a little bit more about current events and kind of just some perceptions and observations and some general conversation about things. It wasn't super specific, but I hope I was able to drive some good points home for you all tonight. I hope I was able to make a little bit of sense. I'm flying solo tonight, so I don't have quite the buffer of some of the more intelligent people to compliment me, but I make do with what I have, and I try the best that I can. So I'm just going to read one more comment here, and then we'll be wrapping it up. So and Gene says, unless things change for the better, we are heading for a, in parentheses, nuclear winter, which no amount of layers of protection will save the planet. It's unfortunate that we have seemingly an age to where people are so predispositioned towards war, to where war is the first response, the only response that people go to. And, there's so many good quotes as it pertains to war, but all of them kind of hammer home the same thing. And I had kind of, brought this up this evening, but, when it comes to war, the instruments of war eventually become the instruments of tyranny at home. They usurp and they deteriorate and they destroy liberties of the people at home, in the country that's waging those wars, in the country that is, promoting or propagating or fomenting war, or even in so much as funding war, subsidizing war, or subsidizing countries who are going to war. It's one of the things that, like, if there was ever to be trepidation in something, we should be very well assured that it is just and that is necessary. The sprinting that we have to going into so many wars is, in my opinion, disgusting. There is a time and place for war. Don't get me wrong, but that should not be our first response. It should not always be the go-to thing. It's not like a snack you have every Saturday night. It is reserved for some of the most intense situations possible, when there is seemingly no other recourse. So if I had one thing to say, please, if you can get behind anything, support Defend the Guard in your state, get involved, support the legislation. If it's not currently going on in your state, if you're able to, try and draft up legislation. I'm pretty sure the 10th Amendment may still have a template floating around of how you can set up that. Otherwise, like I said, in the coming weeks, I'm going to be having hopefully 2 people that can show you how to start the process of drafting bills and legislation, and they're phenomenal people. So, but Defend the Guard is huge. Advocate for peace wherever. Support liberty wherever it is, even the liberty of your enemies. And always be mindful that without liberty, everything else tends to fail in a very, very miraculous way. Yes, you might still have a government. Yes, you might still have a society, but it's not going to be one that could be as high and as efficient and as happy as it possibly could be. So just one final note here. Thank you for tonight. Worth the time to listen. Someone grew up with the Cold War and the threat of total nuclear wipeout from the so-called commies. I fear for my children. And Gene, I'm here to tell you, that is, I never thought that we would ever be as close as we are today. And, and I've had conversations with several people, and it is terrifying. And, if there was ever a time to rally against stuff like this, and to rally against war, and to stop the destruction, to stop the absolute destruction of human lives, I think today and now is a more pertinent time than ever. So I totally agree with you. And I really appreciate, you writing that, because I've heard that sentiment quite a bit, and I have hope for the future, but that hope also comes with us being involved. So with that being said, thank you everybody for coming out, for watching the live this evening. I hope that I was able to do a great job by you. Again, I hope it was informative. I hope you were able to get something out of it. And it was, you know, I'm happy I was able to present some of these topics. Again, if you like what you saw, or you like what you heard, please feel free to hit the like button, a subscribe, leave a comment down below. It all helps. But more than that, I just appreciate you being here. So that is that's kind of my closing thing. Go with liberty, support liberty, support your community, and be good to each other. With that being, with all of that considered, God bless, good night, and we'll see you on the next one.